When my dad left when I was a kid, it was night in the kind of pitch black it only gets out in the woods, where it seems like you may as well be a million miles from the nearest street lamp, for how cut off and groundless you feel. We clung to our light sources out there in the northern mountains of my childhood. Light is what made you feel like a person when the sun went down and the wind began calling, rushing through the leaves of the black oak trees. We would fill the cabin up with candles, and I would do my homework in between the flickering shadows they cast across the linoleum floor. The best light in the house was a single bulb hooked up to a car battery that sat on the table. It would run out of juice pretty fast, though, and my time using it was always brief and monitored. It would steadily fade from a bright, clean white to a dull yellow that barely illuminated the pages, and I would try to get as many seconds as I could before somebody told me to give it a rest already. Sometimes I'd click on a flashlight anyway, curled up on my mattress in the attic, so that I could read more. I never wanted to stop reading. The house itself was a tiny red hunting cabin, down off a long dirt road. We moved out there after my dad got busted, and the money stopped coming in, and he finally got a job at Burger King. He'd talk about seeing the cop that got him in the aisles at Winco, about how he suppressed the urge to bring the glass bottle he was carrying down over the man's head. He got off lucky with just probation and no prison sentence, and we packed our things and disappeared even deeper into the hills. I knew it was a hunting cabin and not a regular cabin because there was a long beam sticking out of the front of the house, and I had asked my mom what it was for when we moved in. She said it was where you slung the deer carcass after you killed and bled it. This seemed reasonable enough, brutal enough for life in the woods. That beam held a gruesome fascination, and I'd stare at it sometimes, imagining dead meat hanging down, blood dripping onto the deck, grizzled hunters living inside our house, using the sink, cooking on our wood stove, never speaking and only killing. Deer were common out there, but seeing one then was always like seeing an angel to me. All I could do was stop, wait and watch, and hold my breath, both afraid and reverent, silently understanding that they were made of something beautiful that people were not, something that had to do with the way the water ran in the rivers, the way snowflakes could come down in hauntingly perfect spirals. The night my dad left, 2 of the dogs got into a fight outside. We always had so many dogs. Back in San Jose after I was born, Dad bought a puppy off a man who should not have had one. His official name was Curly for the ragged hair that stuck up in little half moons, but I called him Bone Boy in my head because of the ribs that still jutted under his skin. He never could gain weight very well, and he always had a crazy look in his eyes like the sparks that burst up from a campfire. The owner had tied him to a metal pole in his backyard with a foot-long lead and beat him so many times that he no longer barked. He had been broken before he had got a chance to grow. Dad worked for months every day, trying to get him to play, to trust his hands, to eat without checking to see if it was safe first. The first time he barked, he cowered, expecting to be hit, and my dad crouched next to him saying, "Good boy, you're a good boy," waiting until the dog was calm enough to come forward and lick his hands. Eventually, Bone Boy's fur grew out and covered his scars, and you couldn't tell anymore how he had been raised, what he had been born into and managed to survive. That night, the dogs were fighting outside on the deck, and inside, Dad was screaming at Mom because she came home late from seeing some guy after work. Every day, she bundled flowers in an icy warehouse. Her 29-year-old hands sore in a way that only endless repetition brings, the soreness that comes before the immobility of arthritis and carpal tunnel. He was screaming, hurling his stuff into his red work bag. He would do that every now and then, fly off the handle, turn into a monster. Like the person he appeared to be was hiding someone else inside him, not our dad, but a stranger. He looked huge when I was that small, his eyes overbright and his spit flying as he yelled. These days he looks so stooped over and beat down, his gray hair in short wisps over his head. I am not nearly so afraid of him now, only afraid of life and the regular kind of brokenhearted you become as you watch your parents get old and collapse in on themselves, like dying stars or sheds under the weight of too much snow. I look at him and have to remember the man who worked so long and with so much patience to care for a beaten dog. My mom sat on the floor and took it, his anger. She waited like a house waits for the hurricane to pass, hoping it doesn't shred away the foundation as it goes. I was sitting on the couch beneath the ladder that went up to the attic where my brother and I slept, waiting it out with her, caught in the shadows. Dad knew us kids were watching, witnessing. He handed her a piece of cardboard with an ugly note scrawled on it, as if swallowing back some of the words he wanted to yell would protect us, as if the damage hadn't been done already. I pretended to be watching The Simpsons. I pretended like I was deaf, like I was a wall, unmovable and impervious to all things. If you keep making that face, it'll get stuck like that. If you keep pretending to be indifferent, you can find it hard to show anything at all. He blustered himself out eventually and left the room. Mom got up without a word and checked on the dogs, opening the door and letting the cold night air come pouring in, like taking a clean breath the size of the whole night sky. One of the dogs came limping in, his eyes wild with hurt like my father's, a valley of blood pouring from a wound in his neck. He was walking in it, panting around the room and leaving bloody paw prints on the linoleum. That night when I was sure my brother was asleep, I wept over everything I had seen and taken in with a sensitive kid's preternatural emotional intelligence. I had passed over something, stepped across a line not of my own making. Dad heard me crying and climbed up the stairs. He sat on the floor next to my bed and put his hand on my back and said, "I'm going to look for a place in town." And that was that. I said, "Okay." And he walked back down the stairs and into the rest of his life, nursing his own injuries. Our individual sadnesses resonating inside of us, scattered across the house, absolutely incommunicable, and the darkness pressed all around like we were stones at the bottom of an ocean.